Bullied teen heard whispers from a locked basement, then 240 bikers pulled up at midnight. The screaming stopped the moment the basement door slammed shut, and that was when the boy realized the whispers weren't coming from his head. They were coming from below his feet, and whoever was trapped down there knew his name. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The house sat alone at the edge of Route 19, where the asphalt thinned into cracked gray veins and the forest pressed close like it was listening. Trucks passed at night without slowing, their headlights sliding over the siding and disappearing again, leaving the place exactly as it was before. Forgotten, tolerated, invisible. Ethan learned early that invisible was safer. He was 16, thin in a way that didn't come from choice, with shoulders that curved inward as if he were constantly bracing for impact. At school they called him Basement because that's where they said he belonged. At home, nobody called him anything at all. The arrangement was simple and cruel in its efficiency. He slept on a mattress that used to be white. He ate after everyone else. He stayed out of the way. The man who owned the house, Gary Holloway, liked things quiet and obedient. His girlfriend liked to pretend Ethan didn't exist unless there was a chore to be done or a mistake to punish. "You're not family," Gary had said on the first night, leaning close enough that Ethan could smell beer and metal. "You're a favor." So Ethan became a favor that didn't speak unless spoken to. The basement door stayed locked, always. Thick wood, new padlock, no handle on the inside. Ethan had checked once, early on, when curiosity still outweighed fear. Gary caught him with his hand on the latch and shoved him hard enough that his shoulder rang for days. "Basements are for storage," Gary said, "and problems." After that, Ethan avoided the stairs altogether. He learned the rhythms of the house instead. When to move, when to freeze, when the TV meant safety, when silence meant danger. The whispers started in late October, the kind of cold that creeps under your skin and settles there. Ethan was scrubbing grease from his hands at the sink when he heard it, soft at first, almost like air moving through pipes. He paused, water running, heart ticking faster than it should. It wasn't words, not yet, just a sound that didn't belong. He shut off the faucet. The house held its breath. Gary was gone, the girlfriend too. Only the hum of the fridge and that sound, low, uneven, human. Ethan stood there for a full minute, counting like he always did when panic threatened to tip him over. 1, 2, 3. The sound faded. He told himself it was the house settling. Old houses made noises. Everyone knew that. But the next night it came back. This time he was sure. It slipped through the floorboards while he lay awake staring at the ceiling, shoes still on in case he had to move fast. A scrape, a muffled thud. Then something that made his stomach tighten into a hard knot. Breathing, slow, strained, like someone trying not to be heard. Ethan sat up. The air in the room felt thicker, heavier, like the moments before a storm breaks. He swung his legs over the side of the mattress and pressed his bare feet to the floor. The sound came again, clearer now, rising from the direction of the basement stairs. "No," he whispered, though there was no one to hear him. He crept to the door, every step measured, ears straining. The hallway was dark, moonlight cutting thin silver lines across the walls. The basement door waited at the end like a mouth that refused to open. Another sound. Closer. A faint tap, followed by a pause. Then 3 more. Not random. Intentional. Ethan's throat went dry. He backed away, heart hammering so loud he was sure it would give him away. He returned to his room and locked the door, sliding down against it until the floor chilled his spine. He didn't sleep. By the third night, the whispers had shape. They came in fragments, breaking apart before they could fully form. A breath that sounded like pain, a word that might have been help, or maybe stop. Ethan pressed his pillow over his ears and still heard it, felt it, vibrating up through the bones of the house. He tried to tell himself it wasn't real. That fear did this, that his brain was filling in gaps because it was tired of being alone. But then the whisper said his name. Not loud, not clear, just enough. Ethan. It slid under the door and into him, settled behind his eyes. He didn't scream. Screaming had never helped him before. The next morning at school, he watched the lockers slam and the hallways fill, and everything felt unreal, like he was moving underwater. A boy shoulder-checked him near the stairs and laughed when Ethan stumbled. "Basement," someone muttered. Ethan kept walking. In history class, the teacher talked about laws and protections and the way systems were designed to keep people safe. Ethan stared at the clock and wondered how many systems you had to fall through before nobody noticed you were gone. At lunch, he sat alone and pushed food around his tray. He considered saying something. Just a question. Just enough to test the ground. But he remembered the last time he'd tried to explain something at home. The way Gary's smile had tightened, the way the room had gone quiet before the first hit. He swallowed the words. That night, the house felt wrong the moment he stepped inside. Too still. Too clean. The basement door was freshly wiped down, the padlock gleaming. The whisper didn't wait this time. It came fast, urgent, scraping against the inside of Ethan's skull. "Please." He stood at the top of the stairs, fingers curled into fists so tight his nails bit skin. He thought about running, about the road, about how far he could get before someone noticed. He thought about what it meant to leave someone else behind. Ethan took one step down, then another. The air grew colder with each stare, damp and sharp. He stopped inches from the door, ear pressed to the wood. "Please," the voice said again, clearer now, closer. "He said you wouldn't help. He said you're like the rest." Ethan's hand hovered over the lock, shaking. Above him, a truck engine growled to life and then cut off. Footsteps on gravel, keys in the door, and from behind the wood, barely louder than breath, the whisper came one last time. "He's home." Ethan didn't touch the lock. He froze on the stair, every muscle locked tight, listening to Gary's boots outside, the scrape of gravel, the jingle of keys. The whisper behind the door fell silent, as if whoever was down there had learned the same lesson Ethan had. When Gary was near, you didn't make a sound. The front door opened, closed. The house shifted under the weight of a man who believed it belonged to him. "Ethan," Gary called, not loud. He never had to be. His voice carried anyway. "You home?" Ethan backed up one step, then another, careful not to let the stair creak. His heart was beating so hard, it made him dizzy. He reached the top, turned, and moved down the hallway just as Gary's shadow stretched across the wall. "In your room," Ethan said. He hated how thin it sounded. Gary grunted. A jacket hit the chair. The fridge opened, closed, a beer cracked. Normal sounds. The kind people trusted. Ethan shut his door and leaned against it, breathing through his nose, counting until the pressure in his chest eased just enough to think. Whatever was behind that basement door had gone quiet, fast, too fast, like it knew exactly who Gary was and what silence cost. That night, Ethan lay awake with his ear pressed to the floor. Nothing, no breathing, no scraping, no whisper. The absence was worse. By morning, he had convinced himself it had been a stress dream stitched together by cold and fear. He repeated that explanation while brushing his teeth, while pulling on the same hoodie, while walking to the bus stop with his hands shoved deep into his pockets. But when he came home that afternoon, the basement door was different. The padlock was new, thicker, heavier. A deep scratch marred the wood just beneath it, like something sharp had dragged across the surface. Ethan stood there longer than he should have, staring at the mark, until Gary's girlfriend cleared her throat from the kitchen. "Don't loiter," she said. "You got work to do." Ethan nodded and moved. That night the whisper came back, weaker than before, stretched thin like someone rationing air. Ethan lay on his side, eyes open, tracking the sound as it crept through the walls. It wasn't constant. It came in bursts, each one followed by long stretches of nothing. He realized then what it reminded him of. Someone hiding. On the fourth night, he heard crying, not loud, not dramatic, the kind you make when you know being heard will make things worse. Ethan sat up so fast his vision blurred. He swung his legs over the side of the mattress and stood there, shaking, listening to the sound bleed up from the floor. "I can hear you," he whispered, barely moving his lips. The crying stopped. A long pause, then, faint but unmistakable, a reply. "So can he." Ethan swallowed. "Who are you?" The answer came broken, dragged out between breaths. "Doesn't matter." "It does," Ethan said. His voice surprised him. It was steadier than he felt. "Why are you here?" Another pause. He imagined someone on the other side weighing the cost of telling the truth. "Because I didn't listen," the voice said. "Because I thought I had time." Ethan slid down to sit on the floor, back against the bed. Is he hurting you?" A sound that might have been a laugh came through the boards, brittle and dry. "He hurts what he owns." Ethan closed his eyes. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. "Can you get out?" he asked. "No." The word landed heavy, final. Ethan pressed his palm flat to the floor. It was cold, damp. He imagined the other side of it, imagined someone doing the same thing, mirroring him in the dark. "What's your name?" he asked. The whisper hesitated. "You don't want that." "I do." Another stretch of silence, longer this time. Ethan wondered if he'd pushed too far. Then the name came, barely there. "Mark?" Ethan nodded even though Mark couldn't see him. "I'm Ethan." "I know." That sent a shiver through him. "How?" "You talk to yourself," Mark said, "when you think nobody's listening." Ethan flushed, embarrassed and oddly exposed. He didn't realize how much he filled the quiet with words meant for no one. He stared at the dark ceiling and let the reality settle in. Someone had been hearing him. Someone had been there the whole time. "What did you do?" Ethan asked quietly. "For him?" Mark said. "Nothing." "For you." A long exhale. "I tried to leave." Ethan's jaw tightened. And he said I owed him. Said people like us don't get to walk away. The whisper thinned, strained. "You know how that goes." Ethan did. The next day, Ethan skipped lunch and went to the library instead. He sat at a computer and typed words that made his stomach knot. Locked basement, illegal confinement, how long before someone notices? The answers were clinical, conditional, full of words like evidence and process and report. He closed the browser. After school, he rode the bus past his stop and got off 2 blocks down, taking the long way home. He needed air, space, time to think. He didn't get far before he heard engines. They came in low and slow, a sound that cut through traffic noise and settled into his bones. Ethan turned and watched as a line of motorcycles rolled past the intersection, dark shapes against the late afternoon sun. They moved with purpose, not racing, not showing off, just moving. One rider glanced his way as they passed, not staring, just seeing. Ethan didn't know why, but the look stayed with him. That night, Mark was weaker. His words came slower, breath hitching between them. "He's not feeding me," he said, like it was a weather report. "Says it builds character." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "That's not." "I know," Mark cut in gently. "Don't." Ethan paced his room, steps measured so the floor wouldn't give him away. "We can tell someone." Mark laughed again, softer this time. "You tried that once yet?" Ethan stopped pacing. He thought of teachers' smiles that never reached their eyes, of counselors who nodded and wrote things down and called home, of Gary's face afterward. "No," he said. "Smart," Mark whispered. "You learn fast." Ethan leaned against the wall, slid down until he was sitting again. "I can't just leave you there." "You can," Mark said. "And you should." Ethan shook his head, even though the dark hid the motion. "I won't." Silence stretched between them. When Mark spoke again, his voice had changed, sharper, urgent. "If you do anything, he'll know. He always knows. And he doesn't forgive." "I don't care," Ethan said. The words came out before he could stop them. They felt dangerous, necessary. Mark let out a slow breath. "Then listen to me?" Ethan leaned forward, heart pounding. "You don't fight him head on," Mark said. "You don't yell, you don't threaten. You make it so he can't hide." "How?" Another pause. Longer. He could hear Mark thinking, measuring risk even now. "You find people who don't scare easy," Mark said finally. "People who don't need permission." Ethan thought of the motorcycles, the way they'd moved together, like they trusted the road to hold them. "I saw some guys today," he said, "on bikes." The whisper sharpened. "Where?" "Near the highway." Mark was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, there was something like hope threaded through the words. "If they ride like they belong nowhere," he said, "they might be the kind who show up anyway." Above them, the house creaked as Gary moved in his sleep. Mark's voice dropped to almost nothing. "You hear that?" Ethan held his breath. Footsteps, slow, heavy, coming down the hall. "Yes," Ethan whispered. "Then we stop," Mark said. "For now." The whisper faded just as Ethan heard the handle on his door rattle once, hard enough to send a jolt through his chest, then go still. Gary didn't open it. He stood there long enough for Ethan to know he was listening. Then the footsteps moved away, toward the stairs, toward the basement, and from below, too faint to be sound at all, Ethan felt the floor tremble once, like a signal passed through the dark. Ethan tried to act normal. It was harder than he expected. Normal meant meeting Gary's eyes without flinching. Normal meant answering questions with the right amount of respect. Normal meant not looking at the basement door, even when he felt it pulling at him like a gravity well. At breakfast, Gary sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, boots still on, jaw working as he chewed. Ethan stood at the counter, waiting. "You gonna eat or just hover?" Gary asked without looking up. Ethan poured cereal into a chipped bowl, added milk that smelled faintly sour, and ate fast. He didn't taste anything. His ears strained for sounds beneath the floor, anything that would tell him Mark was still alive. There was nothing. Gary wiped his mouth and stood. As he passed, he stopped close enough that Ethan felt the heat off his body. "You sleep well?" Gary asked. Ethan nodded. Gary leaned in, his voice low. "Good. Because people who don't sleep start imagining things." He stepped back and smiled like it was a joke. At school, Ethan sat through classes like a ghost. Words floated past him without landing. His notebook filled with the same sentence written over and over again, smaller each time, until it looked like it was trying to disappear. "I hear something. I hear something. I hear—" He closed the notebook. By third period, he made his decision. He didn't tell anyone everything. He told them pieces. He tested the world the way you test ice, carefully, ready to pull back. The guidance counselor listened with her hands folded on the desk, head tilted in practiced concern. Ethan chose his words like he was defusing a bomb. "There's someone in my house," he said. "I think they're in trouble." She frowned slightly. "Someone how?" "I hear things, at night." She smiled gently. "Stress can do that. You've been through a lot, Ethan." "It's not stress," he said. "It's a person." "Do you see them?" "No." "Have you seen any injuries? Bruises? Blood?" "No." She nodded, already writing. "Then what we have is anxiety paired with an unsafe living situation. We can work on coping strategies." Ethan felt something sink inside him. "What about calling someone?" he asked. "Just to check?" She sighed, the way adults did when they thought they were being patient. "If we call without concrete evidence, we make things worse. And if you're wrong—" "I'm not." She met his eyes, and for a second, he thought she might actually listen. Then the moment passed. "I'll call your guardian," she said. "Let him know you're struggling." "No," Ethan said too fast. Her pen paused. "Ethan." "No," he said again, louder. "Please don't." She smiled in a way that made his stomach drop. "I have to." The rest of the day blurred. By the time Ethan got home, Gary was already there. He didn't yell. That was worse. Gary sat on the couch, calm, TV off. His girlfriend stood behind him, arms crossed. "You got something you want to tell me?" Gary asked. Ethan stood in the doorway, backpack still on. "They say you've been talking," Gary continued, "saying strange things, stories." "I didn't—" Gary raised a hand. Ethan stopped. "You think you're smarter than me?" Gary asked. "You think you can make trouble and not pay for it?" Ethan shook his head. Gary leaned forward. "Because here's the thing. People believe what they see. And all they see is a roof over your head and food in your mouth." He stood, walked past Ethan, and opened the basement door. The lock came off. The door swung open. Gary didn't look inside. He didn't need to. "Remember this," he said quietly. "Silence keeps things simple." He closed the door and locked it again. That night, the whisper didn't come. Neither did sleep. Ethan lay awake, staring at the dark, counting trucks on the highway by the way their headlights flashed across his wall. When morning came, his body felt hollowed out, like fear had eaten everything solid. At school, he tried someone else, a history teacher, older, stern, the kind who talked about justice like it meant something. Ethan stayed after class. "Can I ask you something?" he said. The teacher checked his watch but nodded. Ethan told him about the sounds, about the basement, about how scared he was. The teacher listened longer than the counselor had. When Ethan finished, he folded his arms. "You don't have proof," he said. "I have ears." "That's not enough." "What if someone's hurt?" Ethan asked. The teacher's voice softened. "Then you go to the police." "They'll call him," Ethan said. The teacher hesitated. "That's procedure." Ethan nodded. "Then it won't help." The teacher sighed, frustrated now. "Ethan, life isn't a movie. You can't accuse people without evidence. You could ruin lives." Ethan thought of the basement, of the new lock, of Mark's breath catching between words. "What about his life?" Ethan asked. The teacher didn't answer. By the end of the week, Ethan had learned the pattern: concern without action, listening without belief, sympathy that stopped just short of risk. The world wasn't cruel. It was efficient. That night, the whisper came back, weaker, fainter, like it had to travel farther to reach him. "You still there?" Ethan whispered. A pause, long enough that his chest started to ache. "Barely," Mark said. Ethan pressed his hand to the floor again. "I tried." "I know," Mark said. He came down after, stayed a while. Ethan swallowed. "Did he—" "I'm alive," Mark said. "That's all that matters." Ethan closed his eyes. His hands were shaking now, openly, uncontrollably. "I can't get anyone to help." "I told you," Mark said, not unkindly. "I won't stop," Ethan said. Mark breathed out slowly. "Then listen carefully." Ethan leaned closer, ear to the floor. "There's a pull-off by the old mile marker," Mark whispered, "just past where the trees thin. Guys stop there sometimes, the ones you saw." "The bikers," Ethan said. "Yes." "What about them?" "They watch more than people think," Mark said. "They hear things. Road hears things." Ethan frowned. "How would they even listen to me?" Mark was quiet for a moment. "You don't ask them to save you," he said. "You tell them the truth and let them decide." Ethan nodded, even though Mark couldn't see it. "And Ethan," Mark added, his voice thinning again, "if I go quiet, don't stop." Ethan's throat tightened. "You're not going quiet." A faint sound came through the floor. Not quite laughter, not quite a sob. "You're stubborn," Mark said. "I learned from the best," Ethan replied. Footsteps sounded above them. Gary, moving again. Mark's voice dropped. "Tomorrow," he whispered. "That's when he leaves for a few hours." Ethan's heart began to race. "You go then," Mark continued. "If you're going to do anything, you do it then." "And you?" "I'll wait," Mark said. "I've been waiting a long time." The whisper faded. Ethan lay back staring at the ceiling, feeling something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not hope. Resolve. If the world wouldn't listen, he'd find people who didn't need permission to hear. They didn't go straight to the house. Cole led them east first, away from Route 19, toward a stretch of back road that bent through low trees and dead farmland. The pavement narrowed, cracked seams patched too many times, the kind of road you took when you didn't want to be seen arriving anywhere important. They rode in silence, engines steady. No talking over comms, no need. Each of them was already running his own version of the same calculation: risk, consequence, memory. They pulled off near an abandoned grain silo, bikes lined up like they belonged there. The air smelled of rust and old rain. Cole cut his engine last and took off his helmet, setting it on the seat with care. Ray leaned back against his bike and crossed his arms. "Kid's telling the truth," he said. Mason snorted. "You say that like it's easy." Ray looked at him. "You see his hands?" Mason didn't answer. He'd seen them. The shake he hadn't bothered to hide. The way he didn't look away when threatened. Fear that hadn't curdled into lies yet. Luke crouched near the edge of the road, lighting another cigarette. He didn't smoke much anymore, but moments like this pulled the habit out of him. "House is too clean," he said. "That bothered me." Cole nodded. "Me too." Mason frowned. "Clean how?" Luke exhaled. "No neighbors close enough to hear anything. No dogs, no clutter, no reason for anyone to drop by. It's a place designed not to attract attention." Ray shifted his weight. "You saying he planned it?" Luke flicked ash. "I'm saying nobody locks a basement with a fresh padlock because they're tidy." Silence settled again, heavy but familiar. Cole rubbed his jaw. "We don't have proof." Ray looked at him. We've never had proof, not when it mattered. Mason bristled. That's not fair. Ray's eyes hardened. It's accurate. That shut Mason up. Luke stood, grinding the cigarette out under his boot. I can do a drive-by tonight, he said. Late, no lights, just watch. Cole nodded. You'll take Ray. Ray smiled faintly. Of course I will. Mason sighed. And me? Cole looked at him. You'll do what you always do. Mason grimaced. Dig. They split without ceremony. Luke didn't like riding at night anymore. He used to, when the road felt like freedom instead of memory. These days, darkness pulled things out of him he preferred to keep buried. Still, he rode smooth, controlled, keeping distance from Ray's bike as they looped back toward Ethan's house. They killed their lights half a mile out and let the bikes roll, engines low. The house came into view through the trees, squat and unremarkable, porch light off, windows dark. Ray parked first behind a line of brush and waited. Luke cut his engine and listened. Nothing, no TV, no voices, just the wind moving through dead leaves. Luke raised binoculars slowly, scanning. Front door, windows, no movement. Too quiet, Ray murmured. Luke nodded. Someone's home. They watched for 20 minutes. At minute 21, a light flicked on in the kitchen. A shadow crossed it, tall, broad, unhurried. Luke felt his jaw tighten. Then the light went off. Bastard knows when to move, Ray said. Luke lowered the binoculars. Kid wasn't lying. Ray glanced at him. You sure? Luke thought of Ethan's eyes, the way he'd said I live there, sort of. Yeah, he said. I'm sure. They pulled back the same way they came, leaving the house untouched, unannounced. Mason was already working when they got back. He had papers spread across the hood of his bike, phone propped up, grease-stained notebook open. His hands moved with methodical patience, the way they always did when he was angry. Gary Holloway, he said without looking up. 3 arrests, no convictions. Ray raised a brow. 4? Assault, domestic disturbance, 1 DUI. Mason flipped a page. Charges dropped every time, complaints withdrawn. Luke exhaled slowly. Figures. Cole crouched beside him. What about property? Mason slid his phone over. House is rented, cash, month to month. Ray frowned. No mortgage? No paper trail worth following, Mason said. But here's the interesting part. He tapped the screen. Guy had a brother, Mason continued. Mark Holloway. Luke went still. Missing, Mason said. 3 years ago. Silence snapped tight. Ray looked at Luke. Say that again. Mark Holloway, Mason repeated. Last seen leaving a job site. Report filed. Investigation stalled. Case went cold fast. Luke stared at the screen. Mark. Cole's voice was quiet now. How old? 31 when he vanished. Ray closed his eyes briefly. Jesus. Luke felt something settle into place inside him, heavy and certain. Basement, he said. Mason nodded. That's what I'm thinking. Cole stood slowly. Then this just changed. Ray looked up at him. Yeah, it did. They didn't ride after that. They sat, they talked, they laid things out the way they always did when the road led somewhere dangerous. Luke spoke first. We don't scare the kid, Cole nodded. Agreed, Ray added. We don't touch Holloway without leverage. Mason held up his notebook. I can get records, utilities, old permits, anything that shows a structural change. Luke's eyes narrowed. Basement work, Mason nodded. Exactly. Cole looked at each of them in turn. This isn't about payback. Ray met his gaze. It never is. Luke leaned back against his bike, arms crossed. Kid goes back there tonight. Cole's jaw tightened. I know. Luke pushed off the bike. Then we don't wait long. Ethan didn't know any of this. He was back in his room, door locked, lying flat on the floor like before, ear pressed down, listening for Mark. The whisper came late. You okay? Mark asked. Yes, Ethan breathed. They looked. That's good, Mark said, but his voice sounded tired, thinner. Ethan swallowed. They think you're related to him. A pause. So he told you, Mark said quietly. Ethan's chest tightened. You're his brother. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Mark exhaled slowly. Because names make things real, and real things hurt more. Ethan pressed his forehead to the floor. They're going to help. Another pause. Longer this time. I know, Mark said. I can feel it. Above them, the house creaked as Gary moved through it, unaware of how small the walls were becoming. Ethan whispered, "Hold on." Mark didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was barely there. "I am." Outside, far down the road, an engine passed and kept going. But somewhere closer, much closer, 4 bikes sat cooling in the dark, and the road was already deciding how this would end. Ethan didn't sleep at all. He lay on the floor until his bones ached, listening to the house breathe, counting the hours by the way the night sounds changed. At some point, the wind picked up. At some point, it stopped. At some point, Gary turned the television on downstairs and let it run low, just loud enough to remind the house who controlled the noise. Ethan waited for the whisper. It didn't come. That scared him more than when it did. Morning arrived gray and flat. Gary left earlier than usual, boots loud on the steps, keys sharp in the air. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. The door slammed, the truck roared to life, and then the house fell into a silence that felt staged. Ethan waited an hour, then another. When he finally pressed his ear to the floor, his chest tightened with relief. "Mark?" he whispered. A long pause, then, faint but alive, "Here." Ethan exhaled shakily. "They're working on it." "I know," Mark said. His voice sounded rough, scraped raw. "He's nervous." Ethan frowned. "How can you tell?" Mark let out a weak breath that might have been a laugh. "He cleans when he's nervous." Ethan glanced toward the door, imagining Gary scrubbing already clean counters, rearranging nothing. "He'll be back later." "Yes," Mark said. "He won't leave me alone today." Ethan swallowed. "I'm sorry." "No," Mark said quickly. "You did the right thing." The words landed heavier than Ethan expected. He pressed his palm flat to the floor, grounding himself. "They said not to touch the basement, not to do anything stupid." Mark was quiet for a moment. "They're smart. They're careful." "Yes," Mark said. "That too." Ethan hesitated. If they ask you questions, if they need details." Mark interrupted gently, "I'll tell them everything." Ethan's throat tightened. "Even if it makes things worse?" Mark's voice hardened just slightly. "It's already worse. I'm just still breathing." The whisper faded. Ethan stayed on the floor a long time after, staring at nothing, feeling like he was sitting on the edge of something that couldn't be taken back. Cole didn't like moving without consensus. That had been true back when the club was smaller, before age and losses carved rules into his bones. But he also knew when waiting turned into cowardice. He stood with his hands on his hips, looking out over the back road where Luke and Ray had just returned. "Kids holding," Luke said. "For now," Ray added. Cole nodded. "Mason?" "Confirmed," Mason said, tapping his phone. "Basement renovation permit pulled 4 years ago, listed as foundation reinforcement, no follow-up inspection." Luke's jaw tightened. "That lines up." "And utilities," Mason continued. "Water usage spikes at night. Power draw steady, but higher than it should be for a place that size." Ray folded his arms. "Someone's down there." Cole closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the decision was already made. "We don't pull him out today." Luke stiffened. "Cole!" "We don't," Cole repeated. "Not yet." Ray studied him. "Explain." "We go in loud now. We lose control," Cole said. "Cops get called, kid gets taken, Holloway spins a story. Basement turns into misunderstanding." Luke exhaled sharply through his nose. "So we wait." "We prepare," Cole corrected. "We make it so when the door opens, it doesn't close again." Mason nodded. "I can get a lawyer." Luke looked at him. "You still talk to that one in Cedar Ridge?" Mason grimaced. "Unfortunately." Ray's mouth twitched. "Good. We'll need paperwork." Cole looked at Luke. "You stay close to the kid." Luke nodded. "Already planning on it." Ethan felt the shift before he saw it. The air in the house felt wrong when he came home from school. Too tight, too controlled. Gary was sitting at the table, hands folded, not eating. He looked up when Ethan entered and smiled. "Sit," Gary said. Ethan sat. "You've been busy," Gary said casually. Ethan kept his face blank. "School," Gary nodded. "Sure." Silence stretched. Gary watched him the way people watched animals they were thinking about hurting. "You know," Gary said, "people talk. You start asking questions, folks get ideas." Ethan said nothing. Gary leaned forward. "You don't want ideas." Ethan's heart hammered, but his voice stayed steady. I didn't do anything. Gary smiled wider. That's the problem. You think doing nothing keeps you safe. He stood and walked toward the basement door. Ethan's breath caught. Gary rested his hand on the lock, fingers tapping once, twice. Some people only learn when they see consequences. Ethan pushed his chair back and stood. Leave him alone. Gary turned slowly. The smile was gone now. You don't get to say that name. Ethan's hands shook, but he didn't lower them. I know he's there. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Gary stared at him for a long moment, then laughed, short, sharp. You think you're clever, he said. You think you figured something out. Ethan didn't move. Gary stepped closer. Here's the truth. Nobody cares what happens in my basement. Nobody ever has. The front door knocked, once, firm, controlled. Gary froze. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. The knock came again. Same rhythm, no rush. Gary's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to Ethan. Something unreadable crossed his face. Stay, Gary said. Ethan didn't sit. Gary walked to the door and opened it halfway. Luke stood on the porch, helmet tucked under one arm, posture relaxed. Ray leaned against the railing, arms crossed. Mason stood a step back, eyes already cataloging everything. Afternoon, Luke said. Truck broke down up the road. Thought I'd ask if you had a phone charger. Gary looked them over, assessing. Don't know you, Luke shrugged. Didn't say you did. Gary's gaze shifted to Ethan behind them. A flicker of understanding passed through his eyes. No charger, Gary said flatly. Luke nodded, unbothered. All right, appreciate the time. He turned to leave, then paused. You got a basement? Gary stiffened. Just curious, Luke added lightly. House layout looked familiar. Gary slammed the door. Inside, the silence was deafening. Gary turned slowly. His face had gone pale, eyes burning. What did you do? He hissed. Ethan didn't answer. Gary stepped toward him, hand rising. The sound of engines rolled in, low and deliberate, settling into the ground beneath the house. Not one. Many. Gary stopped. Ethan felt it in his chest, in his teeth, in the floorboards. From below, faint but unmistakable, a voice whispered through the house. He hears them. Ethan closed his eyes. Outside, the engines cut one by one, leaving a silence heavy with intention. Gary backed away from Ethan, suddenly unsure. You think this means something? He snapped. You think they'll save you? Ethan met his eyes. I think you don't own the silence anymore. Gary's jaw tightened. You just made things very complicated. Ethan shook his head. You did. From the porch, Luke's voice carried through the closed door, calm and patient. Gary Holloway, he said. We're not here to scare you, Ray added quietly. We're here to make sure nobody disappears again. Ethan felt his knees weaken, relief and fear crashing together. Below his feet, the floor creaked softly. Mark whispered, the faintest sound of hope in his voice. Hold the line, Ethan whispered back. I am. Outside, the road waited, engines cooling, men standing still. The door between before and after had already started to open. Nobody moved. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. The engines were off. The bikes were silent. The men outside didn't shout, didn't bang on the door, didn't threaten. They just stood there, patient as stone, as if time worked for them now. Gary hated that. He backed toward the kitchen, eyes darting, calculating exits that weren't there. You think a bunch of noise scares me? He snapped, loud enough for the house to hear. You don't have a warrant. You don't have anything. Ethan stayed where he was, legs shaking but planted. He didn't look at the door. He listened to Gary instead. He listened for the cracks. Luke's voice came again, steady, conversational. You're right. We don't. A pause. That's why we're not going inside. Gary frowned. That wasn't the answer he'd prepared for. Ray picked it up from there, voice lower, older. We're just here to talk. Gary laughed too fast. Talk to who? To you, Ray said, about your brother. The word landed like a dropped plate. Gary's face changed, not anger, not fear. Something closer to irritation, like a lie being dragged back into the light. I don't have a brother, Gary said. Mason answered without raising his voice. Mark Holloway, missing 3 years, filed his voluntary disappearance, no body, no closure. Silence stretched. Ethan felt the floor tremble faintly beneath his feet, not from engines this time, but from something shifting below. Gary recovered quickly. You got the wrong guy, he said. You should leave. Luke nodded once. We will. Gary blinked. But first, Luke continued, we're going to sit right here, on a public road, as long as it takes. Ray added, we're not blocking access, not trespassing, just existing. Mason's voice cut in, calm and precise. And while we exist, a few calls are being made, records pulled, old ones, permits, utility logs. Gary's eyes flicked to the window, then back. That's harassment, Mason shrugged. It's curiosity. Gary turned on Ethan then, rage flashing hot and sudden. You think this ends well for you? He snarled. You think they stay forever? Ethan met his gaze. His voice surprised him again, steadier than it had any right to be. Longer than you thought. Gary stepped toward him. The knock came again, louder this time, but still controlled. Gary froze mid-step. Luke's voice carried through the door. Gary, this is the part where you make a choice. Gary clenched his fists. I'm not opening that door. That's fine, Luke said. We're not in a hurry. They settled in. Cole arrived 20 minutes later, parking a truck well off the road. He didn't knock. He didn't announce himself. He just joined the line of men standing quietly under the dull sky, eyes on the house like they were watching a tide. Luke briefed him in low tones. Cole listened without interrupting, eyes never leaving the front door. Kid still inside? Cole asked. Luke nodded. Yeah. Cole exhaled slowly. Then we don't push. Inside, Gary paced. He checked his phone 3 times in 2 minutes, then tossed it onto the counter like it had betrayed him. This is nothing, he muttered. They'll get bored. Ethan stayed silent. He knew better. The whisper came faintly through the floor, cautious now. They didn't leave. No, Ethan whispered. They're staying. A pause. Then Mark's voice, thinner than before but sharper with something new. Good. Gary stopped pacing and turned sharply toward the basement door. Ethan moved without thinking. He stepped between Gary and the door. Gary stared at him, incredulous. Move. No, Ethan said. Gary laughed, breathless. You think they'll protect you? You think that makes you brave? Ethan swallowed. No, it makes me done. Gary's hand twitched. Then he noticed the sound. Not engines, not voices. Phones. Outside, quiet as a ritual, Mason had started recording. So had Ray. So had Cole. Not the house, the sidewalk, the road sign. The address number nailed crooked to the porch post. Gary's breathing changed. Luke spoke softly, like he was explaining something to a stubborn animal. You ever notice how things feel different when they're being watched? Gary's jaw clenched. You can't prove anything. Mason nodded. Not yet, Cole added. But you'd be surprised how much truth leaks when pressure stays steady. Minutes passed. Then more. A sheriff's cruiser rolled by once, slowed, took in the sight of multiple bikes parked legally, men standing calmly. No raised voices, no disturbance. The cruiser didn't stop, but it didn't speed up either. Gary saw it. So did Ethan. The whisper came again, weaker now. He's scared. Ethan nodded to himself. Good. Inside Gary's head, plans collapsed one by one. He couldn't force his way out. He couldn't make noise. He couldn't hurt Ethan without witnesses, quiet ones, patient ones, but witnesses all the same. He grabbed his jacket. I'm leaving. Cole spoke up for the first time, voice carrying through the door without effort. You can. Gary paused. And, Cole continued, if you do, we stay, longer. Gary's shoulders sagged just a fraction. You leave the house, Ray added, and the silence stops being yours. Gary turned slowly back to Ethan. His voice dropped, venomous. You don't know what you've done. Ethan met his eyes. I know exactly what I did. Gary opened the door. The men outside didn't move closer. They didn't surround him. They didn't block the path. They just watched. Gary stepped onto the porch, forced a smile. This is harassment, he said loudly, for the road, for the air. You're all trespassing. Luke shook his head. Public space. Mason lifted his phone slightly. Documenting. Gary's smile cracked. He looked past them, down the road, like he was searching for something that wasn't coming. How long? He demanded. Cole answered calmly. As long as it takes. Gary's gaze flicked back to the door, to Ethan, to the house that had finally turned on him. Below the floor, something shifted. Slow, deliberate. A scrape that wasn't hidden anymore. Gary heard it, so did everyone else. The sound rose just enough to be undeniable. Ray's eyes hardened. "There it is!" Gary bolted. He ran down the steps across the yard toward the tree line, breath ragged, dignity gone. No one chased him. Cole watched him disappear, then looked at Luke. "Call it in." Luke nodded and pulled out his phone. Inside the house, Ethan stood trembling, heart racing, listening as footsteps faded, then vanished completely. The whisper rose through the floor, clearer than it had ever been. He ran. Ethan sank to his knees. "Yes." Mark's voice broke, just a little. "Then don't let the door close again." Ethan pressed his palm to the floor, tears blurring his vision. "I won't," he whispered. Outside, engines stayed silent. The men didn't celebrate. They didn't smile. They just waited. Because now the truth was awake, and it was louder than fear. They didn't rush the basement. That surprised Ethan. The front door stood open, afternoon light spilling into the hallway like the house itself was being exposed for the first time. Yet the men outside stayed where they were. Calm, measured, as if speed would cheapen what had taken years to surface. Luke stepped inside first, slow enough that every movement was deliberate. He didn't cross the threshold until Cole nodded. Ray followed. Mason last, phone already recording, not the basement door. Ethan noticed that. But the walls, the ceiling, the way the house breathed when nobody was pretending anymore. Ethan stayed where he was, knees on the floor, heart still trying to tear its way out of his chest. "You okay?" Luke asked quietly. Ethan nodded. It was only half true, but it was enough. Luke's gaze dropped to the basement door. The padlock hung crooked now, like it had been handled too many times in too much of a hurry. He didn't touch it. "Talk to him," Luke said. Ethan swallowed. He pressed his palm to the floor, forehead lowering until it touched the wood. "Mark," he whispered. "He's gone." Silence answered him. For a terrible second, Ethan thought the worst had finally arrived, that they were too late, that all of this had been movement without rescue. Then the whisper came, thin but unmistakably alive. "I know," Mark said. "I heard his breathing change." Ethan let out a broken sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "We're here," he said. "They're here." Another pause, longer this time. "You didn't open it yet," Mark said. Luke crouched beside Ethan, listening. "We will," he said, not to Ethan, but to the floor. "Just not wrong." Mark exhaled slowly. "Thank you." Outside, a second sheriff's cruiser rolled past, slower than the first. It didn't stop, but the driver looked longer this time, took in the bikes, the open door, the men standing still. Pressure doesn't have to shout to work. Mason's phone buzzed. He stepped a few feet away, answered quietly. "Yeah, that's right. Holloway. Basement. Missing person." A pause. "No," he ran. "Yes, we're still on site." He hung up and looked at Cole. "Cedar Ridge attorney's looped in. He's calling county now." Cole nodded once. "Good." Ray leaned against the wall near the door, eyes never leaving the basement. "Mark," he said, voice steady, "I need you to tell me something." A pause. "Okay? Can you move?" Silence stretched, then, "Not far." Ray absorbed that without reaction. "Breathing?" "Yes." "Injuries?" Another pause, longer. "Yes." Ray closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, his voice was unchanged. "We're going to open the door. It might hurt your eyes, it might scare you, but you won't be alone." Ethan held his breath. "I know," Mark said. Luke stood and moved to the basement door at last. He knelt, inspecting the lock without touching it. Mason stepped beside him, filming now, slow pan, deliberate. Luke didn't break the lock. He unscrewed the hinge instead. The sound of metal turning was quiet, controlled. No sudden snap, no violence. The door eased open an inch, then two. Air rushed out. It was wrong air, cold, wet, heavy with a smell Ethan had no words for. Metal and mildew and something human underneath it. Ethan gagged and pressed his sleeve to his mouth. Luke opened the door wider. The stairs descended into darkness, damp concrete walls closing in tight. At the bottom, barely visible, a shape shifted. Mark didn't scream. He lifted his head instead, eyes blinking against the light, face thinner than Ethan had imagined, skin gray and drawn tight over bone. One wrist was bound loosely, more habit than necessity now. The other lay limp at his side. Ray was already moving, slow and calm, descending the steps like he was approaching something sacred. Luke followed, then Cole. Mason stayed at the top, filming, voice low and constant. Mark looked at them one by one, disbelief etched deep. Then his gaze found Ethan. "You came back," he whispered. Ethan nodded, tears running freely now. "I told you." Mark's mouth twitched. "You did." Ray knelt beside him, hands careful, professional. "I'm going to touch your shoulder," he said. "Is that okay?" Mark nodded weakly. Ray's fingers pressed gently. "Pulse is there," he said. "Cold, dehydrated." Luke shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over Mark's shoulders. "You're safe," he said, firm enough to be believed. "Nobody's taking you back down here." Mark's eyes fluttered. I don't trust that yet." Luke nodded. "Fair." Above them, Ethan stood frozen at the top of the stairs, overwhelmed by the reality of it, the smell, the sight, the weight of a living person where fear had lived before. Cole looked up at him. "You don't have to come down," he said. Ethan shook his head. "I do." He took the steps slowly, each one grounding him, until he was kneeling in front of Mark. Up close, the damage was clearer. Bruises old and new, a cut on his lip that hadn't healed right, eyes that had learned how to ration hope. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered. "It took so long." Mark shook his head weakly. "You were fast. Everyone else was slow." Ethan laughed then, wet and broken. "You're terrible at encouragement." Mark smiled faintly. "Still alive, though." Footsteps sounded above them, multiple, measured. A voice called from the doorway. "County Sheriff." Cole answered without raising his voice. "We're inside." The deputy stepped in, took in the scene, and went very still. Ray looked up. "Basement, missing person, condition critical." The deputy swallowed. "Medical's en route." "Good," Ethan thought dimly. "Good." Mark's fingers twitched. Ethan reached out without thinking and took his hand. It was cold. Too cold. "Don't let go," Mark murmured. "I won't," Ethan said. Outside, more engines arrived. Not bikes this time, but ambulances, unhurried but purposeful. The road that had once swallowed sound now carried it cleanly. Gary Holloway didn't come back. He didn't need to. The house had spoken for him. As medics carefully lifted Mark onto a stretcher, wrapping him in heat and hands and attention, Luke stepped back, giving space. Ray stayed close, murmuring steady reassurances. Mason kept filming until a medic nodded and he lowered the phone. Ethan followed the stretcher up the stairs, blinking against the light, chest tight with something that felt like grief and victory tangled together. At the threshold, Mark looked back once at the basement, then at Ethan. "It's louder up here," he said faintly. Ethan squeezed his hand. "You'll get used to it." Outside, the air smelled like rain again, like asphalt, like road. The engines that mattered were running now, and for the first time since the whispers began, the silence didn't belong to fear anymore. The ambulance doors closed with a sound that felt final in the best possible way. Not an ending, a seal. Ethan stood on the edge of the yard, arms wrapped around himself, watching the red lights pulse against the trees. Mark was inside now. Oxygen, blankets, hands that knew what they were doing. For the first time since the whispers began, Ethan wasn't listening for him through the floor. He was listening for the world to respond. It did. 2 more sheriff's cruisers arrived within minutes, tires crunching gravel, radios murmuring. Deputies moved with purpose, not urgency. Clipboards, gloves, cameras. The kind of movement that said this was no longer a rumor or a feeling. It was a process. Cole stayed back, letting them work. Luke leaned against the porch rail, eyes on the road. Ray stood close to Ethan without crowding him, a quiet presence that felt intentional. A deputy approached, younger than Ethan expected, face tight with concentration. "You the kid who lives here?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." "Not anymore," Ray said calmly. The deputy glanced at Ray, then back at Ethan. "You okay to talk?" Ethan swallowed. "Yes." They sat on the porch steps. The deputy asked questions the way they were supposed to be asked, slow, clear, letting silence do its job. Ethan answered everything he could, hands shaking, voice steady only because it had learned to be. "When did you first hear him? Did anyone else live here? Did Gary ever threaten you?" Ethan didn't embellish. He didn't soften it either. Across the yard, Mason spoke quietly with another deputy, pointing toward the basement, toward the lock, toward the hinges Luke had carefully removed. Phones were out now, but not pointed at Ethan, at the house, at the evidence. A man in a dark jacket arrived next, older, posture rigid, eyes sharp. He introduced himself as County. He didn't smile. "Where's Holloway now?" he asked. Luke answered without hesitation. "Running," the man nodded. "That tracks." Another deputy approached Cole. "You guys witnesses, or?" Cole met his eyes. "Observers." The deputy studied the bikes, the calm, the lack of chaos. "You didn't touch him?" "No," Cole said. "We waited." The deputy exhaled slowly. "Good." Word spread quietly. Radios crackled. A perimeter went up, not tight, not dramatic, but real. Gary Holloway's name moved from rumor to active. Inside the ambulance, Mark stirred. A paramedic leaned in. "You're doing good," she said softly. "We've got you." Mark's eyes fluttered open. "The kid?" "He's right outside," she said. "Safe." Mark closed his eyes again, a faint smile ghosting across his face. "Told you," he murmured to no one in particular. "Pressure doesn't peak, it accumulates." By nightfall, floodlights illuminated the house, not harsh, just enough to show everything. The basement was photographed inch by inch, chains, bolts, a mattress that should never have been there, marks on concrete walls where time had been measured in scratches. Ethan watched from the porch, wrapped in Luke's spare hoodie, heat radiating into him slowly. He didn't look away. "You don't have to see this," Luke said quietly. "I do," Ethan replied. Luke nodded. He understood that kind of need. A woman arrived with a clipboard and tired eyes, introducing herself as Child Services. She spoke gently, asked where Ethan wanted to go for the night. "Anywhere but here," Ethan said. She nodded. "We can do that." Ray cleared his throat. "He stays with us tonight." The woman hesitated. "That's not..." Cole stepped in, voice calm, unyielding. "We'll make it official, temporary, supervised." The woman looked at the line of men, the deputies nearby, the house glowing behind them. She nodded slowly. "I'll note it." Ethan didn't know how to feel about that, about the idea that people like this could just decide to stay. But he was too tired to argue with safety. Miles away, Gary Holloway sat in his truck, engine off, hands shaking. He'd driven until the road turned unfamiliar, then stopped, chest heaving, trying to breathe past the panic. His phone buzzed. Unknown numbers, missed calls stacking up like warnings. He ignored them. He told himself he'd planned for this, that people always believed lies until they didn't, that he'd slipped through worse. Then his phone rang again. This time he answered. A voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Gary Holloway," it said. "This is the county sheriff's office. We need you to come in." Gary laughed, brittle. "For what?" "For your brother," the voice replied. "And the boy." The laugh died. "You're making a mistake," Gary said. "There's nothing down there." The voice didn't rise. "Then you won't mind explaining it." Gary stared out at the dark road, realization creeping in cold and heavy. They weren't asking. Back at the house, a deputy approached Ethan again. "We'll need a formal statement later," he said. "Not tonight." Ethan nodded. "Okay." The deputy hesitated. "You did the right thing." Ethan looked at him, surprised. "I didn't do it the right way." The deputy shook his head. "There isn't one." Ethan absorbed that in silence. The ambulance pulled away, lights fading into the trees. Mark was gone now, toward hospitals, paperwork, days that would hurt in different ways. Luke watched it leave, jaw tight. "He's tough," he said. Ethan nodded. "He is." Cole gathered the men with a look. No words, just a shift. They mounted their bikes one by one, engines starting low and controlled, not celebratory. Ray stayed off his, standing beside Ethan. "You good to ride?" Ray asked. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Luke handed him a helmet. "You ride with me." Ethan took it, hands steady now. He glanced back at the house, windows bright, doors open, truth everywhere. "I don't hear it anymore," he said quietly. Ray smiled faintly. "That's because it's not trapped." They rolled out slow, leaving the floodlights, the deputies, the house behind. The road stretched ahead, dark and open, and somewhere between the rumble of the engines and the cool night air, Ethan felt it. The stand wasn't over, but it had held. The silence had changed sides. Midnight didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with coordination. The temperature dropped just enough to sharpen the air, the kind of cold that wakes you up and makes everything feel more precise. The county floodlights stayed on, but the road beyond them darkened as traffic thinned to nothing. The house stood exposed, empty now, its secrets already cataloged, tagged, bagged. Ethan sat on the tailgate of Cole's truck, helmet resting beside him, legs dangling. A deputy handed him a paper cup of coffee he didn't drink. He wrapped his hands around it anyway, feeling the heat seep into his palms. Ray stood a few feet away, phone to his ear, voice low. Luke paced in short, controlled lines, not restless, focused. Mason leaned against a bike, scrolling, stopping, typing again. No one talked about midnight. They didn't need to. At 11:47 p.m., Mason's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen once, then twice, and straightened. "They found him," he said. Luke stopped pacing. "Where?" Cole asked. 10 miles south. Pulled into a closed gas station. Tried to pay cash for a burner phone." Mason glanced up. Deputy recognized the truck. Silence settled, tight and expectant. "Any resistance?" Ray asked, still on his call. Mason shook his head. "Not yet." Luke exhaled slowly. "He won't fight," he said. "He'll talk." Cole nodded. "Let him." Ethan stared out into the dark, trying to picture Gary Holloway alone under flickering lights, bravado collapsing into calculation. He didn't feel triumph. He felt something closer to release. At 11:59 p.m., Ray ended his call and looked at Ethan. "They're bringing him in," he said. "Official." Ethan nodded, throat tight. At exactly midnight, the road changed. Not loud, not fast. 3 cruisers rolled in from the east, lights off, engines low. They parked cleanly, doors opening and closing with controlled finality. A man in a dark coat stepped out, older, posture squared by years of decisions that stuck. "County prosecutor," he said to no one in particular. Then he looked at Cole. "You stayed put." Cole met his eyes. "We said we would." The prosecutor nodded once. "Good." A 4th cruiser arrived, this one louder by comparison, urgency leaking through despite the discipline. It stopped hard. The back door opened. Gary Holloway stepped out. His hands were cuffed, not tight, not loose, exactly right. He looked smaller in the harsh white light, jacket wrinkled, hair damp with sweat. His eyes scanned the scene and landed on the house, on the bikes, on the men he'd thought would go away. Then he saw Ethan. Gary's mouth opened, words forming. Excuses, threats, something rehearsed. They never made it out. The prosecutor spoke first, voice carrying without force. "Gary Holloway, you are being detained in connection with the unlawful imprisonment and aggravated assault of Mark Holloway, as well as multiple counts related to the endangerment of a minor." Gary laughed once, thin and hollow. "This is a mistake," the prosecutor nodded. "You'll have time to explain." Gary's eyes flicked to Ethan again, searching for leverage that wasn't there. "You think this ends anything?" he snapped. "You think you won?" Ethan didn't answer. Luke stepped forward just enough to be heard. "This isn't a win," he said. "It's a stop." Gary's jaw tightened. "You're nothing," he spat. "You don't matter." Ray spoke quietly, almost kindly. "You mattered long enough to be heard." The cuffs clicked tighter as the deputies adjusted their grip. Gary was turned toward the cruiser. As they walked him past the bikes, past the house, past the open road, Gary twisted once, voice rising. "He would have died anyway," he shouted. "People like him always do." The words echoed and fell flat, absorbed by the night. Ethan stood slowly. His legs shook, but he didn't sit back down. "That's where you're wrong," Ethan said. Gary stopped. The deputies didn't. He was half-turned, forced to listen. "He didn't die," Ethan continued. His voice was quiet, but it held. "And neither did I." Gary stared at him, hatred burning bright and useless. Then he was pushed forward, doors opening, shutting, sealing him into a place where his voice wouldn't decide anything anymore. The cruiser pulled away. Midnight passed. An hour later, the house was darker. The floodlights clicked off one by one, leaving only porch light glow and the stars struggling through cloud. Deputies finished their work and peeled away in pairs, leaving behind paperwork and a silence that finally felt earned. Cole gathered the men with a look. No speeches, no congratulations. Luke walked over to Ethan and handed him the helmet again. "Ready?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." They rode slow, the road empty now, engines humming in sync. The forest gave way to open stretches, moonlight glinting off chrome, wind cutting clean across Ethan's face. He didn't flinch at the noise anymore. They stopped once, miles from the house, at a quiet overlook where the land dipped away and the road bent out of sight. The engines cut. The night rushed in. Ray leaned on his bike. "Hospital called," he said. "Mark's stable." Ethan closed his eyes, relief flooding him so hard his knees weakened. Luke steadied him without comment. "He asked about you," Ray added. Ethan swallowed. "What did you say?" "That you're on the road," Ray replied. "Figuring out where to land." Ethan nodded. That felt right. Cole cleared his throat. "We don't disappear after this," he said. "Not for him, not for you." Ethan looked at him. "I don't know what comes next." Cole met his gaze. "Neither do we. That's okay." They stood there a moment longer, listening to the wind move through the dark, to the quiet that wasn't hiding anything anymore. Then they mounted up and rode on. Behind them, midnight faded into early morning. Ahead, the road stayed open. No promises, no guarantees, just distance and motion, and the knowledge that when the world tried to bury the truth again, there were still people willing to stand in its way. Morning came without ceremony. No sirens, no engines, just pale light sliding across the horizon, and the road slowly remembering it was a road again. They stopped at a small medical center outside the county line, just after sunrise. Not the hospital where Mark was. This place was quieter, tucked back from the highway, a place people went when they didn't want attention but still needed help. Ethan sat on a plastic chair in the hallway, hands folded in his lap, staring at a scuffed tile with a crack shaped like a river. The adrenaline was gone now. What remained was weight, heavy, unfamiliar, settling into places he hadn't known were hollow. Luke leaned against the wall a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes half closed but alert. Ray spoke quietly with a nurse at the desk, careful with words, careful with tone. Mason had stepped outside to make a call. Cole sat nearby, still as stone, presence doing what presence did. A woman in scrubs approached Ethan and crouched slightly so she was eye level. "Ethan," she said gently, "I'm Dr. Keller. I just want to check on you, okay?" Ethan nodded. She didn't rush him. She asked about sleep, about food, about pain. She didn't ask why he hadn't said anything sooner. She didn't ask what he should have done differently. When she asked about home, she said it like a neutral word, not a test. When it was over, she stood and smiled softly. "You're safe here," she said, "for as long as you need." Ethan swallowed. "I don't know how long that is." "That's all right," she replied. "Neither do most people." They let him shower. Hot water pounded his shoulders until his knees nearly gave out. The steam blurred the mirror, softened the sharp edges of the night. He stayed under it longer than necessary, letting it rinse off fear that had nowhere else to go. When he came out wrapped in a borrowed sweatshirt and clean jeans, Luke was waiting with a paper bag. "Food," Luke said. "Nothing fancy." Ethan took it, hands trembling again. He sat and ate slowly, carefully, like his body wasn't sure the food would stay. No one commented, no one watched. That mattered more than he could explain. Ray's phone buzzed. He listened, nodded once and hung up. "Mark's awake," he said, asking questions. Ethan looked up sharply. "Can I see him?" Ray considered. "Soon," he said. "Not today." Ethan nodded, disappointment flickering and fading. "Okay." Luke watched him quietly. "You don't owe him anything," he said. Ethan shook his head. "I know, but I want to." Luke accepted that without argument. By midday, arrangements had shape. Temporary placement, paperwork, a social worker who actually listened, a quiet room that wasn't a basement and didn't lock from the outside. A promise, careful, conditional, but real, that no one would send Ethan back to that house. Ethan signed forms with a hand that was finally steady. Outside, the bikes were lined up, not ready to ride yet, just waiting. Cole stood with Ethan near the edge of the lot. "This is the part people mess up," he said. They think rescue is the finish. Ethan looked at him. It's not. No, Cole said. It's the start of living with what you know now. Ethan thought of the basement, of the whispers, of the moment silence changed sides. I don't want to forget, he said. Cole nodded. You won't. But it won't own you either. Late afternoon, the hospital called again. This time Ray handed the phone directly to Ethan. His heart hammered as he pressed it to his ear. Hello? There was a pause, a breath, then a voice he recognized instantly, clearer now, steadier, still rough around the edges. Hey, kid. Ethan laughed, the sound breaking out of him before he could stop it. Hey. They say I'm a mess, Mark said. But I've been worse. Ethan swallowed. I'm sorry I didn't. Don't, Mark interrupted gently. You did more than anyone. Silence settled, comfortable this time. They tell me he's in custody, Mark continued. Yes. Another pause. Good. Ethan closed his eyes. I can come see you soon. I know, Mark said, but listen to me first. Ethan leaned against the wall. You didn't save me because you're brave, Mark said. You saved me because you refused to stay quiet. Don't lose that. Just learn when to rest. Ethan smiled faintly. I'm tired. You should be, Mark replied. That means you're alive. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Mark added, softer. Thank you. Ethan whispered it back. As the sun dipped low, the men gathered their things. No speeches, no goodbyes that tried to be final. Luke approached Ethan last. He held out a folded piece of paper. Numbers, he said. Places, in case you need us. Ethan took it, fingers brushing Luke's calloused hand. You're leaving? Luke nodded. Road doesn't like standing still. Ethan looked at the bikes, the scars, the men who had chosen patience over violence and pressure over noise. You're not heroes, Ethan said. Luke smiled slightly. No, but you stood, Ethan added. Luke met his eyes. So did you. Ray clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder, firm and grounding. We'll check in, he said. Not to hover, just to make sure you're still walking forward. Ethan nodded. I will be. Cole mounted his bike, helmet on, posture easy again. Before starting the engine, he looked back at Ethan one last time. Remember this, he said. The world doesn't change because it wants to. It changes because someone refuses to look away. The engines came to life, low, controlled, familiar now. They rolled out in pairs, not fast, not loud, disappearing down the road like they had never been there. But Ethan knew better. That night, alone in a clean room with a window that opened, Ethan lay on the bed and listened. No whispers, no scraping, just wind in trees, a distant truck, the normal sounds of a world that kept moving. He pressed his palm to the mattress, not to the floor, and closed his eyes. For the first time, silence wasn't something to survive. It was something to rest inside. The road didn't end. It never does. It just loosened its grip. Ethan learned that over the next few days, in small, unremarkable moments that carried more weight than the night, everything changed. Paperwork became routine. Names stopped sounding like threats. Doors closed softly and opened when he asked. Food appeared without conditions. Silence stayed silent. He moved into a temporary place outside town, a narrow house with a porch that faced nothing important and everything calm. The woman who lived there didn't ask questions she didn't need answers to. She showed him where the towels were, which floorboard creaked, how the lock worked, from the inside. That detail mattered. At night, Ethan lay awake sometimes, habit refusing to die quietly. He listened anyway. The house responded with honest sounds, pipes, wind, a dog barking far away. No whispers, no signals, no names spoken from below. When sleep came, it came clean. Mark's recovery was slow and unglamorous. There were tubes, physical therapy, long pauses in conversation where words ran out before meaning did. Ethan visited when the doctor said it was okay, sitting beside the bed, hands folded, not trying to fix anything. They didn't talk about the basement, not at first. They talked about small things instead. Music Mark barely remembered. A job he used to hate, a stretch of road he loved driving before everything narrowed. One afternoon, Mark looked out the window for a long time before speaking. You know what saved me? He asked. Ethan waited. Routine, Mark said. He needed everything to stay the same. That's why he didn't kill me. Killing is messy. Keeping someone quiet is neat. Ethan nodded slowly. You broke that, Mark continued. You changed the pattern. I just talked, Ethan said. Mark smiled faintly. That's what everyone says right before things move. Gary Holloway never came back into Ethan's life. His name surfaced occasionally, in updates delivered carefully by people trained not to re-traumatize. Charges stacked, stories unraveled, neighbors remembered things they'd ignored. Silence lost its value as a shield. Ethan didn't feel satisfaction. He felt distance, which was better. The men on bikes checked in exactly twice, once by phone. Ray's voice steady, unintrusive. Just making sure you're breathing and eating, he said. No speeches. Once, by postcard, no return address, just a stretch of road printed in black and white, horizon bending away. On the back, 4 words written in block letters, still standing, keep going. Ethan kept it folded in his pocket for a long time. School resumed in pieces, new counselors, new teachers who didn't know his history unless he chose to tell it. He learned how to say no without apologizing, how to leave a room when his chest tightened, how to let adults handle things without feeling like he was giving something up. Some days were harder than others. Some days the memory came back sharp and uninvited, the smell of damp concrete, the way sound travels through bone. On those days, Ethan went outside. He walked until his breathing matched his steps. He reminded himself where he was. He wasn't underground. He wasn't unheard. One evening, months later, he sat on the porch as dusk settled in layers of blue and gray. A motorcycle passed far down the road, engine low, respectful. Ethan watched the taillight fade and felt something quiet and solid settle in his chest. Not debt, not obligation, recognition. The road wasn't calling him to run, it was just there. Mark was discharged in the spring, thinner, slower, alive in a way that felt earned rather than granted. He hugged Ethan once, careful and awkward, then stepped back. You don't owe me visits, he said. I know, Ethan replied. They stood there a moment, neither rushing to fill the space. Still hate basements? Mark added. Ethan smiled. Me too. They laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was true. On the drive back, Ethan rolled the window down and let the air rush in. It smelled like rain and fuel and distance. He rested his arm on the door and watched the road unfold, mile by mile, unremarkable and infinite. He understood something then. The men hadn't come to save him. They had come to stand. Mark hadn't survived because of strength. He had survived because someone refused to stay quiet when quiet was easier. And Ethan hadn't changed the world. He had changed one house, one basement, one line that no longer existed. The road stretched on ahead, humming softly under the tires, carrying everyone away from where they'd been and toward whatever came next. It didn't promise anything, but it was open, and that was enough.